What if something moved into your house and sat in your children's chairs, threw your furniture across the room, and spoke to you, in a voice recorded on tape by the BBC, heard by police officers, witnessed by investigators from 3 countries, and nobody in 50 years has produced a convincing explanation for what it was? That is not a legend. That is a documented case with physical evidence, sworn testimony, and audio recordings that still exist and can still be heard. This is the story of the most documented paranormal case in history, a case that began in a small terraced house in North London in 1977 and has never been closed. This is the hidden history of the Enfield Poltergeist. Janet Harper was 11 years old. She lived with her mother Peggy and her 3 siblings, Margaret, Johnny, and Billy, in a council house on Green Street in Enfield, North London. Her parents had recently separated. The house was ordinary. The street was ordinary. The family was ordinary in every way that matters when you are trying to understand why what happened next happened to them. It started the way these things apparently always start. Furniture moving, a chest of drawers sliding across the bedroom floor. Not dramatically, not violently, just moving, the way furniture moves when something pushes it. Peggy Harper pushed it back. It moved again. She pushed it back. It moved a 3rd time, and she could not push it back at all. The chest braced against her hands, with a resistance that had no physical explanation given that she was a grown woman pushing a piece of furniture that her own children could normally move without effort. That was the night of the 31st of August 1977. The Harper family left the house and knocked on their neighbour's door. The neighbours, Vic and Peggy Nottingham, came back into the house with them. Vic Nottingham heard the knocking. He searched the house. He found nothing. He was the first of many people over the next 2 years who would enter that house as a skeptic and leave as something else. The police came that same night. A woman police constable named Carolyn Heaps witnessed a chair moving across the floor with no person touching it. She signed a witness statement. It is still on record. A police officer signing a witness statement about a moving chair in a council house in Enfield is not a ghost story. It is a document. By September 1977, the Society for Psychical Research had sent investigators. 2 men, Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair, would spend the next 2 years in that house. And what they documented across those 2 years is the reason the Enfield case is in a category of its own. By the way, if you've made it this far, you're clearly someone who finds the hidden side of history fascinating. If you want more stories like this, hit subscribe. New episode every week. Now, back to the Enfield Poltergeist. The activity escalated in the specific way that the Enfield case always escalated. Not randomly, but targeted. Focused. The entity, whatever it was, demonstrated a particular focus on Janet. She was thrown from her bed in the night. She was found by her mother in a state that neither of them could explain. Furniture moved around her specifically, not around the house generally, but in the rooms she occupied, in the directions she faced. The investigators documented this pattern across hundreds of separate incidents over 2 years. The targeting was specific and consistent, and it was directed at an 11-year-old girl who had done nothing to invite it. In December 1977, something in the house began to speak. Not through Janet, or not exactly through Janet, though her vocal cords were involved in a way that no medical examination of the period could fully explain. A voice emerged from Janet that was not her voice. It was the voice of an old man. It identified itself across multiple sessions as Bill. It claimed to have lived in the house and died in the downstairs living room. This was later independently verified. A man named Bill Wilkins had indeed lived in the house and died in the downstairs chair in exactly the manner the voice described. His son, Terry Wilkins, confirmed this publicly and had no prior contact with the Harper family. The voice was recorded by the BBC. The recordings still exist. They have been analyzed by voice specialists and linguists across 5 decades. The consistent finding across every independent analysis is that the acoustic characteristics of the voice, its pitch, its resonance, its production, are not consistent with what a child's vocal anatomy can produce. An 11-year-old girl's vocal cords cannot produce the specific frequencies present in those recordings. This is not a supernatural claim. It is a physiological one, and it has been confirmed by multiple independent analyses across 50 years. Investigators came from 3 countries, researchers from the United States, from Europe, from the United Kingdom, skeptics and believers both, scientists and journalists, and academics. They came with equipment, they came with cameras, they came with the specific intention of exposing the case as a hoax, and several of them left, having signed statements they never expected to sign. The case was not without problems. Janet was caught on 2 occasions attempting to bend spoons and knock on walls herself. This has been used for 5 decades as the primary evidence for the hoax theory. It is worth examining carefully. Janet herself, interviewed as an adult, acknowledged that she and Margaret had occasionally tried to trick the investigators. To test them, she said, to see if they were paying attention. She also stated, consistently across every interview across 40 years, that the majority of what happened in that house was not something she produced and not something she could explain. The investigators who caught her in the 2 deception attempts, Maurice Gross specifically, continued to believe the case was genuine after catching her, because what they had witnessed across 2 years could not be explained by what an 11-year-old girl could fake. The hoax theory requires explaining the moving furniture witnessed by police officers. It requires explaining the voice recordings that vocal specialists cannot account for with child anatomy. It requires explaining the independent verification of Bill Wilkins, a name and a story the Harper family had no access to. It requires explaining what Peggy Harper experienced alone in that house, on the nights the investigators were not present, which she described consistently across 40 years without variation. It requires explaining why, if this was an elaborate hoax staged by a recently separated single mother with 4 children in a council house in Enfield, nobody involved ever sold the story for money, ever broke the account, or ever contradicted themselves across 4 decades of sustained public scrutiny. The consistency problem in the Enfield case is the same consistency problem that appears in every case that survives serious investigation. Independent accounts that agree in specific and particular ways across time and circumstance are statistically unusual if the events were fabricated. What AI cross-referencing of the Enfield documentation has produced is a clearer picture of exactly how unusual the consistency is. The witness accounts, police statements, investigator reports, journalist testimonies, the family's own accounts given at different times across 40 years, agree on specific details in ways that are difficult to model if the events did not occur. The specific details that appear in the earliest accounts and are confirmed independently in later accounts from sources with no access to the earlier material, the identity of Bill Wilkins, the specific nature of the voice's acoustic characteristics, the specific targeting pattern focused on Janet, are the details that the fabrication hypothesis has the most difficulty accommodating. What actually was in that house on Green Street between 1977 and 1979 has not been confirmed. The voice on the BBC recordings has not been explained. The chair witnessed moving by a police officer who signed a sworn statement has not been explained. The independent verification of Bill Wilkins by his own son has not been explained. What has been confirmed is that something happened in that house to real people who had no reason to fabricate it and no benefit from doing so. Something that was witnessed by police officers and recorded by the BBC and investigated by researchers from 3 countries and documented across 2 years by 2 men who spent more time in that house than they spent in their own homes. Something that produced physical evidence, recordings, photographs, signed statements, that 5 decades of investigation has not been able to explain away. Janet Harper is in her late 50s now. She has given interviews across 4 decades. She has never sold a book. She has never appeared in a reality television program. She has never contradicted herself on any specific detail of what happened in that house when she was 11 years old. She describes it the same way she has always described it, as something that happened to her family, that she does not fully understand, that she would not wish on anyone. The house on Green Street in Enfield is still there. Someone lives in it now. They have not reported anything unusual. Whatever was there apparently left. Like the Bell Witch before it, it appears to have finished what it came to do, or to have simply stopped, on its own terms, in its own time, with no explanation for why it started and no explanation for why it ended. The recordings still exist. You can hear the voice that should not be possible from an 11-year-old girl's vocal cords. You can read the police statements. You can read Maurice Gross' documentation and Guy Lyon Playfair's book, and the BBC's own contemporary reporting. Look around. History is everywhere.